Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Welcome to Friday. Join me, Jenna Ellis, on Jenna Ellis Tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Salem News Channel for day 3 of the Trump verdict watch. And if you have been following any of the leftist headlines, they are just chomping at the bit to get that guilty verdict. But will it come down? We will discuss. We will also discuss other top trending headlines, like the 2024 presidential election. That's kind of a big deal. And some of the Republican candidates that spoke at the Libertarian Party convention last week. What did they say, and why is this important? We'll be joined by Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute to talk about the Libertarian Party, the overall two-party system, and what this portends for conservatives and the GOP. We'll also talk to Jeff Hunt from Salem Media in Denver, and he's going to talk about some really interesting headlines, including this one, bear meat, and why you probably shouldn't have undercooked bear meat. All this and more, very important on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So since last weekend when the Libertarian Party convention was held and Donald Trump and RFK Jr. and a few others spoke at that convention, there's been a lot of commentary about the Libertarian Party, particularly with their very far extreme candidate that they actually nominated. So here to discuss what the Libertarian Party is doing and also where the maybe smaller, not capital L, libertarians' votes may go is our good friend Tho Bishop, who is the content director at the Mises Institute. So Tho, welcome. And first, before we get into this, I actually think the Babylon Bee had the best response and headline, as they typically do. Libertarian Party nominates giant gay bong. And for those who are not watching on the television channel, you are missing epic Babylon Bee. So there you have it. And, what's going on with the libertarians?
Well, there's been a growing, interesting battle within the Libertarian Party, which if you're not interested in third-party politics, which most people shouldn't, it kind of came to a head at the convention. Last 4 years, you've had an effort to try to elevate what we might call, right-wing libertarians, socially conservative libertarians that were frustrated with Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, both because of some of their social views, as well as just kind of frustration with kind of adopting these sort of discarded Republican figures and making them the part of the top of the party. You had a big move to kind of take over leadership of it with a group called the Mises Caucus, no affiliation with the Mises Institute, but inspired by they're big fans of some of our scholars, our ideas, and things like that. And so they took over the party 2 years ago. The big hope was to have a nominee that better reflected those views. And then when it actually came to the convention, even though their chairman, Angela McArdle, maintained leadership of the party itself, they ended up nominating Chase Oliver for a variety of convention. This is the conventions have all sorts of backdoor politics and things like that. And what you get in the aftermath is someone who is very culturally liberal, someone who was very pro private vaccine mandates versus some of like the anti-COVID tyranny stuff. Someone who fits more aligned with, say, the Reason magazine, Cato Institute vision of the libertarian movement, rather than some of the ideas that were being promoted by Mises Caucus advocates like Dave Smith, who's a very popular podcaster. And so what's interesting is that,
let's talk about Chase Oliver, though, for just a second, though. I mean, because he's also very much in favor of the LGBTQ agenda, which, if you follow the rational thought of libertarian policy and their political ideology, I mean, that kind of is, there are really no government guardrails in the sense of like where conservatives actually have moral virtue and values. But also, he has come out in favor in some articles that are reporting in favor of sterilizing children. I mean, some of these things that are way more extreme in the LGBTQ agenda that I wouldn't have thought the libertarians, capital LLP would stand for.
Well, and again, this was a kind of a 50-50 sort of battle at the end of it, because these are issues that do concern a lot of libertarians. And what you have is, fundamentally, we can talk about the legal structure as much as possible. There's a lot of overlap in terms of, hating taxes, wanting to abolish government agencies. But ultimately, there's a cultural dynamic here. What is ethical? How do we treat children? What are the protections that should be involved, particularly when you have this much broader cultural zeitgeist that is itself subsidized by the state, right? These ideas did not come out of the ether. These are not, the products of some sort of rationalized scientific method, right? These are explicit cultural agendas pushed by the state and proxy actors, various corporations that get funds from it. We're going to talk about the Pritzker family and some of the very interesting political ties with the larger transgender movement there. But so you have a very distinct difference here on what is the cultural connection to libertarians. And so again, this was the goal of the people that try to take over the party, was to try to get away from this, and they proved to be unsuccessful for a variety of reasons at the convention. And so you get someone who, again, if you're the big shadow, obviously, of the convention was Donald Trump. In many ways, the outcome, despite the boos and some of the headlines that came from addressing a hostile audience, this outcome is the best possible thing for Donald Trump, for Republicans trying to attract libertarian voters, because some of these cultural issues in particular are the ones that push a lot of, say, the old Ron Paul voting demographic away from the Libertarian Party in the past. And so there's been a doubling down on the cultural left element of it. And that is, again, I think one of the reasons why, like, the idea of a libertarian movement that has no view on cultural lenses, it all breaks down because ultimately people have preferences for the community they want to raise their children in, for these cultural issues. And so again, you had the cultural left side of it win the nomination of this, which is going to have, again, I think it represents a big defeat for the people that tried to change the party. And it'll be interesting to see the fallout for it, both in 2024 and the future.
Yeah, and I do see this contrast and conflict between the more of the Reason Foundation, as you mentioned, or the capital LPs that really want less and less government, and they don't see government as a good tool or good institution in society, but almost as an interference at all turns, unless we assent to a contract and we agree that government can moderate or adjudicate contract disputes, and the non-aggression principle. But for general libertarians, I think that are more close to conservatives, that maybe just don't have a Christian faith base, or for whatever reason they identify as libertarian instead of conservative, there's actually a lot more in common, because they recognize that in order to have a moral and upright society, you need to have a moral code that is implicit in law. And so government, therefore, is a necessary good when it's used for moral purposes. And so the argument then, of course, comes down to how much power does government have, and where can government run afoul, and that's where power contradicting power and all of these other arguments that our Federalist has, as you're very well aware of. So I think that the conflict naturally between these libertarians that are almost anarchists versus the common sense, average, small L libertarian is widening. And so what opportunity do the conservatives and the Republican base have to maybe capture some of the votes of these libertarians that are actually more ideologically aligned than maybe they even realize?
Well, I don't even think the distinction is necessarily those that believe in the importance of contract as kind of the overriding thing there, and the desire to replace, say, traditional government structures with a greater emphasis on what we might call private governance and things like that. That really isn't a distinction, in my opinion, as much as it is recognition from the cultural conservatives that have those same views, the extent to which the state itself has created the cultural conditions that has destroyed Christian values, that has changed the cultural dynamic within this country fundamentally. And, I think the critique that they would have of people like Chase Oliver is the extent to which they are parroting lines that themselves are promoting ultimately the state at the end of the day. If you don't have a self-governing society, if you do not have a culturally conservative society, then self-governance is the key to any restraint of the state. And so if you simply kind of promote hedonistic values, if you promote libertinism rather than self-responsibility or the values that Christianity has brought to the West, then you're actually going to get a state that's more, you're going to get a citizenry that becomes more dependent no matter what sort of language you try to use in terms of you know the size of the role of state and things like that. This is why you saw like the Cato Foundation actually defending vaccine mandates and the like. They want to do it privatized, but again, that same enforcement mechanism of listen to the experts, listen to the zeitgeist of the time being promoted by the government agenda. These were major discrepancies there. Now, I think it is interesting. One of the big speakers at the conference was Vivek Ramaswamy, who tried to extend an outreach. He talked about the possibility of a libertarian nationalist alliance, in his own words. And this is not actually something unique to the current day. You actually had a lot of libertarians. You had people like Ron Paul, Murray Rothbard, that worked with Pat Buchanan's campaign in '92. And I think the common core there is a fundamental distrust of the government, of the institutions that your average Donald Trump supporting Republican also distrusts. Now, the destruction of the regulatory regime, skepticism of the FBI, skepticism of these agencies that Tucker Carlson talks about and the like. So what I think is going to be interesting now, whether or not, obviously, Donald Trump came to that convention and really had sort of an old school brand of politics that, look, I'm not a libertarian, but I'll give you some stuff that you desire. I'll put some libertarians in my cabinet. I'll pardon Ross Ulbricht, which has been a big cause for libertarians. I'll give you some things that you want if you join my coalition, or you can get the 3%, which I think is being too generous, and continue to lose politically. And that kind of goes to a conversation of broader strategy about what opportunities is there for libertarians, being a small percentage of the general population. How can you actually get gains in the margin? I mean, I think one of the big issues that Donald Trump brought up was the crypto industry, which has gotten a lot more politically active. And so whether or not you'll have some libertarians that double down, they're basically partisans in their own right for a third party. But I think there's going to be libertarians that look at RFK because of his views on medical freedom. You're going to have some libertarians that might find Donald Trump more appealing given what he was offering at the convention. And so I think you'll see a split of that, what we might call that libertarian political coalition. But I think the Libertarian Party, with their nominee, is going to see a massive fall off in terms of people that were otherwise open to a third party libertarian ticket. I think that there's a big alienation because of, again, all these variety of cultural disputes that exist amongst the libertarian factions.
Yeah, really a fascinating insights, Tho Bishop, and you're absolutely right that there is a marked distinction between liberty and libertine, and we can't confuse those two. And I think that there are a lot of libertarians that do. But it's fascinating to me to look at this setup when you had RFK coming in as the independent candidate. I mean, if there was any election that we may have an opportunity to divest America from this kind of two-party, in my view, corruption of just this stranglehold, it would have been this election. But RFK didn't even really get much of a percentage. I mean, he didn't even break 5% at the Libertarian Party. So I don't think that they're really coalesced in terms of what they want from a third party. So you're probably right that they need to just make those encroachments on the margins and build up their party from there. But Tho Bishop, really appreciate it. We're already out of time for this segment. We'll be right back with more. Well, the Democrats never let a good controversy go to waste, and that includes the recent flag drama that involves two flags with Justice Alito of the U.S. Supreme Court. Here to talk about all of this and what it potentially means, or is it just all nonsense, is Auron MacIntyre, a writer for The Blaze. And Auron, all of this kind of broke when I was out on vacation last week, so kind of catch me up. I don't see really where the drama is here.
No, absolutely. This is just our constant 2 minutes of hate that the media demands from people today. Look, the background for this is that Justice Alito has a summer home, a cabin in New Jersey, and there was a flag flown upside down at one point, which is, of course, a symbol of distress. It's not a symbol of disrespect to the American flag. It's simply someone expressing the fact that they believe that there's something wrong. There is something that is threatening the country. Also, recently, a flag was discovered flown at that cabin called the Appeal to Heaven flag, which is a pine tree on a white background. Not exactly the most dangerous imagery one could imagine. And on the flag, there's a quote from John Locke, who's, of course, the father of classical liberalism, quoted heavily or taken heavily in context of the American Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson. And the quote is about an appeal to heaven for self-government, for one who might oppose the tyrannical rule of a king. the left has turned this, of course, into some kind of representation about how Samuel Alito is actually a secret fascist who supports all kinds of evil, totalitarian, conservative policies. He's ready to go ahead and recreate the Handmaid's Tale while enforcing Christian nationalism upon all of us. Of course, all he's doing is flying a flag that the founding fathers flew, that is deeply tied to American history. But this is what the left really hates ultimately. They hate American history. They hate American identity. They need to manufacture even more ridiculous controversies every day to go ahead and convince their rabid base that they are involved in some kind of battle for existential rights of kind of the current Democratic majority. And so ultimately they find a new villain in the person of Samuel Alito.
It's also cute. I mean, it's like this reminds me of the state of Oregon's flag, and their license plate that has the pine tree with the white background. I mean, this is just so innocuous, but it reminds me of the flag, the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, which of course has some of its origins in American history as well, and that was taken out of context of a young kid who wore it on a backpack to school, and suddenly he's this white fascist, or whatever term they want to call him today. But it's so ridiculous that some reports are also suggesting that Democrats are trying to tie Alito waving this flag as some kind of sympathy for J6ers, because apparently this flag was also flown by some. But I mean, people also wore pants on January 6th. Just because Alito wears pants, I'm assuming, but beneath his robe, does that mean that he's a sympathizer? I mean, it's so far-fetched and utterly ridiculous. But this is the type of intimidation tactic that the left also tries to use against conservative justices. I mean, even like Justice Thomas with his wife, Ginny Thomas, being very politically active, and justices' wives and judges' wives are absolutely, or spouses, are absolutely allowed to do that. But the left wastes absolutely no opportunity in trying to get conservatives back on our heels and apologize for simply engaging in American society. So, I think that the New York Post had a great piece from their editorial board that just said this is nonsense. And I wish that more conservatives would just tone it that way, that we would just say, okay, it's utter nonsense, move on. Don't even take the time to engage it. Has Alito even responded to this beyond, kind of contextualizing it? I mean, I don't even know if he should have responded to it. It's so ludicrous.
Yeah, it's understandable that we had this rush to contextualize it. And look, guys like Glenn Beck over at The Blaze did a great job of providing the history and giving that context for people. But ultimately, I think you're right that conservatives need to learn to brush this stuff aside. Look, the reason that they're going after the Supreme Court is very clear. Like you said, ultimately, the left now views the Supreme Court as a block to their power. For a very long time, the left was on the outs. They didn't have public opinion behind them, and they had to overrule majority opinion, democracy, as they like to pretend to care about, in the United States through judicial fiat. We had things like forced busing and gay marriage and all kinds of very unpopular policies advanced through judicial fiat and not through the will of the people. And the left were more than happy to engage in that kind of activism, that kind of judicial activism, back when they thought it benefited them. But now that they have access to basically an unlimited supply of captive voters through mass immigration, the fact that they have a monopoly on things like the media and academia, which allows them to manipulate mass democracy, they've decided that instead of loving the Supreme Court, they actually hate it. And they also hate any other impediments to mass democracy, like the Senate or the Electoral College, and they want to dismantle all of that so they can go ahead and rule by importing large amounts of voters that they can manipulate through the media, educational systems, and the welfare state. And so the Supreme Court has become a hindrance to them. Also, the Supreme Court is actually a monument to the effectiveness of minority action on the right. For a very long time, conservatives bought into the idea that the majority always dictates things. But the dedicated action of pro-life conservatives and their activism delivered wins in institutions like the judiciary that meant that they could shift the game in the way that the left usually does. And of course, the left doesn't like that. They don't want us to understand how those institutions work. And so they need to destroy the fact that the right actually won something. They actually understood the game and played the power game correctly. They need to destroy that win, because that shows conservatives how to actually move the ball forward. It's not always about making the best argument. Sometimes it's about putting the right people in the right places at the right time.
Yeah, really well said. And I can only imagine how defensive the Democrats would be if, say Justice Sotomayor decided to wave a Black Lives Matter or a pride flag outside of her home. And they would say, well, that is completely fine. That is not, in any way political speech. Because judges rightly should not be engaging in political speech in that sense. And of course, Supreme Court justices are not bound by the same judicial code of conduct. Personally, I think they should be. And Chief Justice Roberts has made some allusion to the fact that that may be something that the justices will contemplate. But, here, if you're just displaying signs of Americana and you are, waving the American flag, even upside down as a symbol of distress, I mean, that isn't a political statement as much as it is just engaging in American society. And so, I do think that there also is, Auron, a wide hypocrisy from the Democrats because they would rush to defend their own for actual violations of the code of judicial ethics. But then when it comes to very innocuous things like, just being at one summer home, then they're quick to slam conservatives for it.
Absolutely, but ultimately we have to recognize that calls of hypocrisy are not going to sway these people, right? They don't care. That doesn't matter to them. Ultimately,
Yeah.
what they care about is power. And that's why I think what you said earlier about the need of conservatives to blow this stuff up, not even care, not even engage in this stuff, ultimately to recognize that the reason that they're squealing and screaming like this is that they do hate America. They do hate America's identity. They do hate America's history. And so the representation of that through a flag like the Appeal to Heaven flag is something that they despise. And the only thing that you can do when you have an opponent who approaches politics in this manner is to defeat them. And ultimately, that's why they hate Alito. That's why they hate a conservative Supreme Court, because it represents the ability of the right to win, to actually understand where
Yeah.
power lies, take control of the Constitution, and fight back against the relentless march of the left.
Yeah, so well said. Thanks so much, Auron, and really appreciate your insights. You can read everything that Auron says and also his podcast at The Blaze. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Abraham Hamilton.III, who's the general counsel for the American Family Association, rejoins to discuss this headline coming from The Federalist. Court rules schools can force LGBTQ ideology on kids against parents' religious objections. Abe, what is going on? Because clearly this is a First Amendment violation, among other things.
Yeah, absolutely. You had three families who have children enrolled in the Montgomery County School District in Maryland, who range from kindergarten to fifth grade. And the law in Maryland said that any, sexuality instruction, the parents have the right to first review that, and if they find it to be objectionable, to have their children opt out of that particular instruction. Well, the Montgomery County School District adopted a policy that said, well, we'll allow parents to opt out as long as those requests don't become too burdensome and it's not too difficult for us to implement. And so in this instance, the school district just told the families plainly that we don't care if your request to opt your children out, that they won't be opted out. You have to let them sit for this instruction. And so they sued the school district. And unfortunately, at the federal district court level, the parents lost. And so they appealed their case to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which governs cases from Maryland, North and South Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. And the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the district court and said that these parents cannot opt their children out of this instruction. As you mentioned, this is a clear violation of the First Amendment. And the families involved were one Christian family, one Muslim family, and one Jewish family. But to all of them, the court and the school system both have combined at this juncture to say that we get to dictate to your children what they learn. We don't care what your religious beliefs may be, which, as you mentioned, is a clear violation of the First Amendment, not to mention state law in Maryland.
So clearly, this will likely go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which hopefully will grant cert, hear this, and overturn and reverse the Fourth Circuit. And this is why judges matter at every level. This is why elections matter, and of course, why the U.S. Senate matters in terms of accepting those nominations, upon advice and consent of the Senate from the president. And so where are we situated in terms of the composition of the Supreme Court and what you predict may happen?
Yeah, hopefully the Supreme Court will grant cert. If they take up this case, I do expect the Fourth Circuit to be overturned. But this underscores the significance of not only the court systems, but even our public education system. Because for so long, parents have been told, well, you can opt your children out. The whole Virginia case that led to Glenn Youngkin's election imploded when his opponent imploded because he said that we don't believe parents should have the authority to tell teachers what they can teach. Well, the question is, whose children are they? Are they the parents' children, or are they our government's children? And if our government gets to call the last say, parents need to be aware that our rights are being enforced very thinly, very, very, very thinly, and to have at this juncture, the court system, the appellate court system, to say that we don't care what you believe as parents, the government gets to decide what your children will and will not learn. That is a very sobering and a very harrowing concept to consider at this state of affairs in our nation.
Absolutely. And we need to learn from history and, the Maoist propaganda that was indoctrinating children and, leading to a lot of the Marxist indoctrination that we've seen in other countries. And we can't let that happen here in the United States because you're right. I mean, God gave children to parents and parental rights are still meaningful in this country. And so the solution for parents, of course, is to look for other options besides not just public schools, but government funded schools. Do not turn over your children to the government. And so where are we at in terms of the landscape of school choice? Because I think that's been a huge referendum across the country.
And this is something that is burgeoning under the scenes across the country, and it's drawing bipartisan support. You're seeing state legislators who happen to be Democrats crossing the aisle to support Republicans as they advance school choice options in various states. But to your point, I would just simply offer a warning that we need to be very careful about allowing the government to get its camel nose under the tent, because where the government sneaks in, the government ultimately seeks to control. And so I think what needs to occur is that parents need to remain vigilant and do what we can to be as sure as possible that the government has no room, no rule, no say in terms of the substantive pedagogy that goes on with our children. They belong to us as parents. They don't belong to the government.
Well said. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, some old school Democrats, and by old school, I mean like really, 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 really old Democrats, and yes, I'm talking about James Carville, are not so convinced that Democrats' messaging is very good. So joining me now to discuss is my good friend Jeff Hunt, who is on 710 KNUS Salem out of Denver and hosts a really great morning show there. So Jeff, let's listen to this clip from James Carville, who just kind of goes off the rails, I think, but it's a really fascinating assessment of his own party. And let's listen to it first, and then we'll share some thoughts.
And we keep wondering why these young people aren't coming home to the Democrats, which is, or why blacks are not coming home to the Democrats. Because Democratic messaging is full of shit. That's why.
Sure.
And talk about cost of living. And we're going to help deal with this. And don't talk about Gaza and student loans. That's so out. That the Harvard, that guy Delavolpe is pretty good. Give him 15 issues. You know what the number 14 and 15 issue were total? Student debt in Gaza. I forgot which order it's in. And why are we forgiving student loans for people that go to Harvard, which, according to Scott Galloway, quite accurately, is nothing but a hedge fund that has classrooms? Well, they got a $52 billion surplus. Why are taxpayers going to bail these people out? Why don't you come out for a proposal to tax every university endowment over $5 billion and use that money to give their former students relief?
All right, Jeff. So this was part of a 15, 18-minute rant. But what do you make of James Carville, who is very colorfully expressing his displeasure with the Democrat Party?
Well, he's exactly right. So Democrats have become the party, literally, of only gays, Gaza, and abortion. They don't have an answer for anything else. And that is why everybody is leaving the Democrat Party right now. Blacks are leaving the Democrat Party. Hispanics are leaving the Democrat Party. Young people are leaving the Democrat Party. James Carville is exactly right. On the issues that matter most to the people here in the United States of America, the Democrats have absolutely no answer whatsoever, right? And Jenna, you remember this. We ran into this in Colorado years ago when Mark Udall ran for U.S. Senate against Cory Gardner. And all he talked about were women's issues over and over again, so much so that the liberal media in Colorado called him Mark Uterus because there was nothing else he talked about. And when it comes to improving the lives of actual voters, right? Democrats don't have a message. So if it's only gays, if it's only Gaza, if it's only abortion, well, they're essentially the party of the Bravo channel. The only people that remain left with Democrats are college-educated, white, liberal, suburban women. That's it. Everybody else is hanging out with James Carville going, at least come up with a message that resonates with me and makes a difference in my life.
Yeah, so true. And I love that people like James Carville are pointing this out because, he remembers when the Democrat Party actually had a message and had something to offer Americans when they weren't actually as extreme. Now, obviously, as conservatives, we still saw the Democrats as too far to the left, which was true, but it wasn't as wildly to the left as they currently are. And now it's all just, a bunch of these washed up celebrities, and Lizzo basically that are going to Joe Biden's fundraisers. But, why then are the polls suggesting that it's this close between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? I mean, I can't imagine that there are actually that many stupid people in America that would vote for another 4 years of Joe Biden.
Well, let's start with the different audiences, right? So for white, college-educated, liberal women, it's not really about issues. It's about personality, and they just really don't like Donald Trump. I mean, that's what it comes down to for that group. But for Hispanics and for African Americans and for young people, I think Republicans are breaking through in ways that they never could have imagined. Jenna, I worked for Mitt Romney. I remember sitting in all those meetings post 2012 when we're like, gosh, can we please try to figure out a way to reach African Americans and Hispanics and young voters in a better way? And within 4 years, Donald Trump showed up, and Donald Trump has broken through in a way that Mitt Romney, John McCain, George W. Bush could have only dreamed ever of being able to reach. So Donald Trump's breaking through. But, it's a personality issue for a lot of voters. I think it's kind of a gut reaction that they don't sometimes like the fighting style that Donald Trump has. He's now facing, criminal trials and civil trials and federal criminal trials as well. And that, kind of gives them a little sense of hesitancy. But the truth is, Joe Biden offers zero solutions. And we have seen 4 years under both of these guys. And I think it's arguable, very clear, that the 4 years under Donald Trump were so much better for everybody. And the 4 years under Joe Biden have been disasters. So, yeah, they may not like Donald Trump's personality, but what James Carville is saying there is that the Democrats are literally offering no solutions, to the point where we're just talking purely identity politics. And it's not actually improving anybody's lives. I think if the election was today, I think Donald Trump wins in a big way. But, there's a lot that could happen between now and November.
Yeah, and that's why we have to, as conservatives, continue to press these issues. But one of the things that I really respect that James Carville is saying is that he's saying this publicly, and he's not just going along with it because it's his party. And I think that Republicans and conservatives could take a page from that and could rightly criticize our own, whether it's Donald Trump all the way down, when the issues when they don't actually follow conservative issues. I mean, when there are Republicans that, for example, cave on the issue of life, or they aren't presenting the best solutions. I mean, this is the type of fabric of political discourse that we used to have. And again, he's a really, really, really old school Democrat, but he's showing that he's not just going to be siloed into whatever the Democrat Party says is our party line. And we see that Democrats more often will just go along with whatever their party leadership says. And conservatives, unfortunately, are tending to do that same thing with Trump because they think that if we criticize him, then we're just giving it all away to Joe Biden. I think we actually make the Republican Party healthier if we criticize and critique and actually put our best foot forward. What do you think?
You're exactly right. And that's why people love you, Jenna, because you're willing to speak truth, even if it's against the party line. Look, James Carville's trying to send an SOS message to other Democrats right now. Save our ship, please. Redirect, refocus, get this right. Otherwise, we're going to lose. And smart Democrats will listen to James Carville in this case. But unfortunately, they're leaving. I mean, those kind of blue dog Democrats, they're not finding a home anymore. I mean, look at West Virginia. Jenna, you and I are old enough to remember when West Virginia used to be a solid blue state for Democrats. That's entirely shifted now. And I give credit to Rick Santorum. He wrote the book on this, The Blue Collar Conservative. The Republican Party is jettisoned, and I think for a good reason, the country club, Chamber of Commerce, Mitt Romney, John McCain Republicans that we had all through the 90s and early 2000s, they're done. Okay? We're now more blue collar. We're connected with the voters. We're connected with people's real issues. I think that's a really good thing. So, smart Democrats would figure it out, but they're not. They're going to stick with Joe Biden. I can't believe they're even staying with this guy at this point. And he has no message that actually delivers for people.
Yeah, and if they were smart, they wouldn't be Democrats. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, or they would at least be people like James Carville that were willing to call out their own party, or people like Tulsi Gabbard, or people like even RFK Jr., who I really hope, by the way, in just the last minute we have here, Jeff, I really hope that RFK Jr. gets on the debate stage, because I think he's the only one that will address certain topics like COVID accountability that neither Trump or Biden really wants to face, that the American people really want to hear.
The fact we went through all those COVID, all the lockdowns, all the restrictions by government, and all those people are still in office is shocking to me. Robert F. Kennedy on the debate stage going after this issue would only be better for America. I hope he's there as well.
Yeah, same. All right, well, we'll be right back with a very weird, I think, headline with Jeff Hunt, with more right after this. And we're back with Jeff Hunt from Salem Radio Denver with a headline that only Jeff Hunt, the rancher from Colorado, could properly address. This coming from Yahoo News. Headline: family infected with brain worms after eating undercooked bear meat, the CDC says. Quote, 6 people became infected with a parasite known as brain worms after eating undercooked black bear meat, or food cross-contaminated with the meat, at a family reunion in 2022, the CDC said in a new report. In May 2022, a group of 9 family members met in South Dakota and shared kebabs made from the meat of a black bear and vegetables. Earlier that month, one of the family members harvested the meat in northern Saskatchewan, Canada. So this is a Canadian bear, Jeff. I think that's actually the culprit here, because it came from Canada. If it had been an American bear, we would have been fine, Colorado black bear. But I have to ask the question, who in the world is eating black bear meat?
Oh, come on. It's Western. We eat black bear meat all the time. We eat rattlesnake. We eat elk. And oh, sure.
Buffalo.
There's a great
Buffalo,
restaurant in Colorado
Rocky Mountain
that does
oysters. That. No,
hey,
but seriously?
Yeah, Rocky Mountain oysters.
That's served in Colorado? Oh my gosh.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. But I got to ask you this. Did you have worms in the brain on your bingo card? I mean, the fact that this is what we're talking about in 2024 presidential, that there would be candidates and people with worms in their brains. That's not something I ever expected. But Jenna, you know this. You know that the woke mind virus is a worm in the brain. I mean, it essentially gets in there and it consumes everything and they become crazy. I think this might be the newest conspiracy theory. I think this is why Michelle Obama was all about those school meal plans, because this is how they got the woke mind virus into all the kids that attend government-run schools. It came through the food. No, I mean, can you believe that Robert F. Kennedy, with a worm in his brain is performing better than Joe Biden in television interviews. He'll do better on the debate stage. What does that say about Joe Biden and the fact that there's a guy with a dead worm in his brain performing better than him?
Yeah, I mean, this is like an episode of House. I mean, remember that was like the first episode of that show, House, of like the medical mysteries, was some, lady who came presenting with all of these random symptoms, and then it was actually a worm that was in her brain and like bloodstream, and it was like this medical weird kind of thing. And now here we are, yeah, with actual presidential candidates, like you said, performing better than the ones without brain worms. But we don't actually know that, Jeff. We don't know. I mean, maybe Biden has a brain worm. I mean, they're not really telling us anything about his health. So maybe that's what the American people should demand, is some reporter, if you're listening, Peter Doocy, ask Joe Biden at the next press conference, have you eaten bear meat recently? See what he says. I mean,
Right.
I don't know, maybe Memorial Day,
Right.
kebab? What do we think?
And this is a wild story. So a number of the people got brain worms in that particular case, and they didn't even eat black bear meat. It was just attached to the kebab. So they ate the vegetables on the kebab and still got worms in their brains. So yes, the big point being, this is something that all political leaders need to be evaluated for. Because if it's affecting their brains, it could probably be affecting the leadership that they're providing to their state. So to your point, Jenna, yes, every political leader needs to be evaluated for brain worms.
Yes, and I think on the debate stage, and assuming that RFK Jr. gets there, he would answer this question very honestly. But I think that one of the debate questions, Jeff, should be: have you or any of your family members, have you eaten bear meat lately, or anything that has been close to undercooked bear meat? I mean, just throw that out there, because who knows what Joe Biden might say when that's not on the teleprompter. I mean, I think that some of these debate hosts should get a little bit creative like that, and so that we know that it's not just something that's being overperformed by the candidates, and just ask. I mean, I would love to hear President Trump answer that, because he would have a hilarious response. But in just the last about minute that I have with you, Jeff, I mean, this is a ridiculous story, but in all seriousness, the health of our commander in chief is a big deal. And Americans should be asking some of these questions of Joe Biden. And I honestly can't believe that he's really agreed to a debate, because, 4 years ago, he performed pretty well. I don't know about now.
Well, yes, and a message to everybody: please cook your bear meat, cook all your meat, so that you don't end up with brain worms. But to your point, what I would do is, if I'm Donald Trump walking out on that debate stage, I'd be holding an ice cream cone, just licking the ice cream cone and acting like a Roomba, and just making fun of the fact that Joe Biden, unless he's literally on meth, which is what I think he has to take these days to get that type of energy up, he's useless as the commander-in-chief of the United States of America. So it'll be fascinating to see how much they have to pump Joe Biden up to be able to compete. But then again, I think Robert F. Kennedy could really give both those guys a run for the money.
It'll be amazing. But great public service announcement from Jeff Hunt. Always appreciate it. That's all the time we have here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Make it a great weekend.